How's it going, crypto community? We got some pretty big news. This coming from Forbes. So, central banks are using blockchain to stabilize the global financial system. What is it that Brad Kimes says? Come on in. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the middle of the financial revolution. Those of us invested in XRP are invested in specifically what these central banks are using. The exact ledger, the exact coin that these central banks are going to use to stabilize the global financial system. So let's hear how Forbes explains how Ripple is going to do that. Because we, having done our research, having dug into what the central banks have been doing for the last several months, know that this discussion here about the central banks is in as it regards to Ripple and the Ripple net, and thus the XRP ledger, right? So let's jump straight into this. Article starts. There's been a lot of talk about how cryptocurrencies and blockchains are at odds with policy objectives and nation states, especially with the emergence of Libra and the reaction to it from policymakers around the world. Pardon me. However, there are areas of collaboration where the spirit of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies reduce the volatility generated by the conventional financial system. So, one of the most underrated implications of the Great Recession of 2008 was how it showed the stark weakness and strengths of an integrated global economy and spurred policy innovations to break out of the silo of nation-by-nation monetary policy. One of the most direct mechanisms for this was the rise of currency swaps, one lines where central banks agree to swap their domestic currencies between each other to help alleviate financial problems in foreign jurisdictions that increasingly affected globalized domestic currencies. Now, this has been something tested with the Chiang Mai Initiative, the CMI, and the Asian financial crisis, but the global financial crisis of 2008 was the first time this regional setup became a global reality. And it was only now that it is only now that cryptocurrencies and blockchains are playing an experimental role in that space, right? So on December 12, 2017, the Federal Reserve extended US dollar swap lines with both the Euro and the Swiss National Bank, allowing both of them to fulfill domestic demand for the US dollar. Europe and Switzerland and the Swiss demand for the US dollar was actually affecting short-term funding markets and interest rates. The currency swap allowed for the Federal Reserve to alleviate those pressures without directly funding foreign banks, and the ECB and SNB stepped in instead. So ultimately what's going on is that the US dollar was being opened up to these to these financial institutions who were basically, taking these Federal Reserve notes and thus helping to increase the short-term value of the dollar, essentially, by creating an artificial, basically by creating a reserve fund. Now, that's not exactly what that is, but that's the easiest way for you that didn't understand what that was. That's the easiest way that you're going to understand. I know that's not what it was. Don't come at me like that. I know. I can feel the one person who's like, that's not exactly right, but I know it's not exactly right, but most people, that's how you will understand it best. So one of the most, let's just jump down here and see if we can find out where they actually start talking about. Oh, so on stage, he being the Monetary Authority of Singapore, the chief fintech officer, Sop Nendu Mohanty on stage talked about distributed ledgers as the potential solution to how to deal with central banks that were not as established in the global financial ecosystem as the G10 central banks, and explicitly mentioned developing future pilots of cross-border currency swaps driven by distributed ledger technologies. There you have it, right? Do I need to read any more? Because we know who it is that is targeting cross-border remittances and thus currency swaps, right? Now, in the Canadian policy speech, mentioning the domestic DLT experiment, Project Jasper, the Bank of Canada was to embark on trade finance and cross-border currency swaps, which were explicitly mentioned, with the Bank of Canada claiming one estimate suggests DLT could enable banks to save as much as $20 billion a year in global back office costs if applied to cross-border payments, securities trading, and regulatory compliance. About as much money as the amount poured into fintech every year from an early part of the speech. So, it is clear that DLT can help solidify the formation of currency swaps, even among partner central banks who may have reasons to doubt one another. DLT and blockchains allow central banks to perform cross-border settlements near instantly, allowing much-needed funds to flow quickly in times of crisis. Beyond that, however, it is a tacit admission that some of the principles of Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies it spawned have paradoxically addressed key points of weakness in the evolution of the global financial system. Currency swaps are a real politic take on the reality that domestic monetary policy is eroded by foreign money markets. The ability to transact without a very high threshold of trust and the need to do so immediately harken back to a fundamental tenet of cryptocurrency. In other words, these two systems are essentially two halves to a greater whole, and so it's actually really powerful for traditional systems to integrate to this, because it allows for the fiat system to exist on top of an actual global store of value that grows alongside the ever expanding marketplace, right? So you have a store of value and a store of debt on top that you can build on top. So while much has been written about the tensions between cryptocurrencies and central banks, in truth, we might be witnessing an ongoing Hegelian Hegelian dialectic. That's a wonderful term that I don't truly know what it means, right? So, but we're witnessing ongoing talks with the global financial system as thesis, cryptocurrencies as antithesis, and the synthesis of the two yet to come. So the idea of that final statement ultimately is that we're witnessing these two systems that are polar opposites come together to create a greater whole. Basically what I literally just said, right? So, with all that said, I hope you've enjoyed this read through. I hope you're looking forward to mass adoption, because that's what this video is going to be titled. Go ahead and call it clickbait. It's not. Forbes is saying it now. Forbes is saying the central banks are going to use blockchain XRP, because that's the group that they've been meeting with. We've watched it. I have videos breaking down Brad Garlinghouse, CEO of Ripple Labs, sitting there on panels talking with these central bankers at their meetings. We have video of Christine Lagarde praising Ripple, praising XRP. We know which one they picked. We've made the right investment. Those who deny it, sorry, I'm done hiding it now. I've got all that I need. I know where we're going. It's obvious. It's so obvious. And I'm sure it's obvious to most of you that have listened this far. So thank you so much for watching my video. If you're new, be sure to hit that subscribe, also ring that bell, and if you obviously enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like, right? It really helps me get my videos up in the algorithms, and as always, I appreciate your viewership. Since you've gotten to this point in the video, I'm sure you already know my out phrase, but as always, I can't wait to see all of you in my next video on Mars. Oh, yep, there we are, Mars.